we will be doing the comments at the end. So whatever questions you have, you can definitely ask them. But throughout the webinar, a lot of those questions will get answered. So if any unanswered questions are there, I will definitely pick them up at the end, and I can ask Dr. Zirak for his comments on that. All right. So a quick background on Equinox Labs. We are a 15-year-old company. We're focused on water, food, air testing with a very deep focus on food safety audits. We have about 14,000 customers in the corporate and F&B world, and about 40,000 restaurants that we work with. The reason we work with 40,000 restaurants is we are the audit partners for companies like Zomato, Swiggy, Dine Out, and any other national aggregator. Our reports are accepted across 160 countries. We have trained over 50,000 people in the area of food safety, FSSAI, environment, COVID-19 precautions. This would be the first one where we're doing it for something that is non-food related. So I'll tell you why we're doing this one. So we today have about 250 people in-house. These are chemists, microbiologists, all domain experts in the fields of water, food, and air. And we also have around 700 auditors across 150 cities, making us one of the largest auditing agencies in Asia. We've won multiple awards over the last few years: the Operational Excellence Award, the Most Impactful Healthcare Leader Award, Food Safety Leadership Award, and Great Place to Work. So a little bit about Food Safety Month. Every year, WHO celebrates 7th of April as a Food Safety Day or a Safety Day. And every year for the last few years, we've been celebrating a month-long event called the Food Safety Month. And through this, we do things like quizzes, puzzles, webinars, posts, games, as a way of increasing awareness around food safety, right? This time, the the Food Safety Month, we've impacted almost about 50,000 people were impacted, 35,000 participants were there, and more than the quizzes that we did, were played more than 10,000 times. So the main idea has always been creating awareness around safety. Our area has always been water, food, and air. But this time I thought, what we're going through, I thought the mental well-being and mental safety is as important as all these others, if actually more important. Because if you have all that, then you can worry about water, food, and air, right? So I thought, who is the best person I can go to? And Dr. Zirak is a friend and one of the most leading child and adolescent psychiatrists and psychotherapists. Today, he has been trained at the Westchester Medical Center from New York. He has 19 years of experience in educational psychology, guiding children with learning disabilities, developmental delays, autism, emotional and behavioral, as well as psychological problems. He is also a young mental health first aider accredited by the Mental Health First Aid Australia. He's also medical director at the Birla Integrated School. And he's also the advisor and a senior psychiatrist at Empower. He's also written 2 books, fantastic books. If you worry about children's mental health, these are the 2 books that you have to read. One is Parenting in the Age of Anxiety, and the second one is Conversations That Matter, right? So without further ado, Dr. Zirak, welcome to our webinar. Now, I would like to start with the most simple thing, and I think what people are worried about the most is how has this pandemic affected children and teenagers' mental health?
Sure. Thanks for having me here, Ashwin, and looking forward to this. So, yes, I think that's the question. I think what most people and parents and schools ask. And if you ask me in a nutshell, at this point, I think after a long 1 year and post a 1 year, our kids have truly been heroes, if you ask me, through this pandemic, But of course, I think how it's affected kids, I would say it's in different age groups. So coming to the really tiny toddlers, right? And like what we call as COVID births and COVID babies, right? The sad part is they've not been to school, they've not gone to their preschools, they've not gone to gardens and not had normal, social interactions and play, which is such an essential tool for their social and fine motor, gross motor skill development, right? So I think that's one of the key setbacks, that has happened for that age group. And like my own nephews and, who've been born in this year, and they've, we tried to attempt a drive after things got a bit relaxed. And I remember that they had startled responses because they couldn't take the sensory overload of just the sights and the sounds of a normal street and traffic noise. So that's how it's affected and will keep affecting that age group. I think the kids who are under the ages of 9 and 10 years of age, I think, of course, they sorely miss going to school for their friends. I think social skill deprivation and social isolation, as they call it, uh, has hit this age group. I mean, my kids, of course, like I said, it was the honeymoon period. As I joke, when the lockdown started, they thought it was one big holiday, and I think so did we. We thought it would be a few months and we all get back to normal life, and it didn't. Uh, so the kids, I think, over time, sorely missed that social connect and friendships and bonds. And I think, I keep harping on social skill development because it's so part and parcel of education and learning, right? So that's what that age group, I think, has missed out on. And then, of course, you have the adolescents and the teenagers who've, again, for them, social skills, their peers are everything. And a lot of anxiety has built up. And I think that's also got to do with the poor kids, right, who've been studying and studying for months for their board exams with so much of uncertainty. And I think that one word, uncertainty of the future, I think affects all of us, adults and children. They didn't know whether they were going to have the exams, not have the exams. Was it going to be postponed? Or, I know a lot of IB schools and other schools have taken their previous grades, for that they've had all so far. And, some kids who are unwell maybe didn't perform that well. And they were so disheartened to know that those grades then would be taken as their predicted grades. Parents, right? I know so many parents who've scraped all their hard-earned money to perhaps send their kids abroad and overseas. Those dreams have been taken away. I mean, many parents have, felt and shared that why spend so much of money on overseas education for that experience when they're sitting behind a laptop with online classes, right? So those are the main aspects that have led to distress across these age groups that have directly impacted the children. I think what's happened in the larger scheme of things is families. I mean, even the way the lockdowns, right? It's not normal to be in four walls, and privacy issues has been a great thing. Previously conflicting families, the increase in abuse has gone up, and I'm talking of physical abuse, verbal abuse, unfortunately even sexual abuse on children has gone up tremendously. Marital distress, when there's anyways some kind of anxieties and conflicts between sometimes a mother-in-law or a daughter-in-law and things like that, those have definitely scaled up naturally, right? Because you're in a confined, there's no outlet. It's not like you have a fight and then you blow off steam and then you can come back. So that's created distress in homes. And of course, when there's distress in homes because of space constraints, no privacy, old conflicts, work-life balance, right? I mean, all of us are juggling that, right? It's so difficult to sometimes just tune out and say, I'm done with office hours or work hours. I mean, that's again played a huge overlap in not knowing how to create those boundaries. Loss of jobs and financial instability is a huge distress. And COVID itself. I mean, you have to understand, knowingly or unknowingly, our kids and babies are heroes, yes, and strong and resilient. But are they going through anxiety? Each kid is going through anxiety. My own babies, who I thought are tough as hell and resilient mentally, sometimes break down in the night, crying, and mom and ask whether we are going to die from COVID. And we don't realize, right? The news is all out there. You open a newspaper, there's dead bodies and grim images. Or we are sometimes talking on the phone, right? Especially with the second wave, there's been so much of distress and awful news that we've all dealt with either family members, relatives, or workmates. Kids have imbibed it all. So I think anxiety is one of the main mental health setbacks I think that our kids are going through and will continue to go through even coming back to normal life.
That is, I think the kids have been probably hit the hardest, but are not able to express it. Like an adult feels something, I can tell somebody about it. A kid may not know even how to do that. So as we come back, soon when we get back to normal life, post-pandemic, what kind of concerns do you see between children and educational setups? Are you seeing any challenges there?
That's another huge $1 million question, right? Even we who run schools and in the educational space are not even envisioning, I think, really the true mental health challenges that are going to be surfacing at the time when we all come back to normal. And I think that's going to be more distressful. Like me, for one, I don't know how I'm going to go back to normal life. I was joking with you, how do we dress up with normal clothes and wear pants and go back to
Yeah.
office? But with kids, Ashwin, I think the main challenge is, I think all of us at home have given them, or rather not given them, autonomy and independence. And naturally so, right? I mean, we've had kids across all age groups. Every school has battled with, getting online education up and started in no time. Literally no time. We didn't have time. I mean, when this started, we were like in the school that we run for kids with special needs, we were in the middle of a summer break, and our teachers never had that, right? So teachers had to, and so many, old time teachers or senior teachers are not tech savvy and IT savvy. So for all of us to get into this online mode, and for our kids across all age groups to suddenly get up in the morning, wear a school uniform and sit in front of a screen, it's been challenging. But like I said, our babies are true heroes and all kids have adapted beautifully. I think teachers are they're godsends for us, right? I mean, the way they've kind of overcome their own challenges. Imagine what the teachers are going through, right? With their own families, own privacy issues, and their own kids who need education. I mean, they've sometimes, had to ignore their own kids' schooling and looked after their jobs and the kids they've been, teaching in schools. So I think we as parents have obviously had to shield our kids a lot, right? Because I mean, it's all alien. So we've all sat besides our kids sometimes and helping with uploading and downloading. So I think the big stress that teachers are foreseeing is when our kids come back, they're going to be very codependent. They're going to again go through a whole surge of anxiety, whether it's the sensory overload. Just imagine for 1 year they've not gone to school. Now, I don't know if you remember, but when we had our 1 month summer break, it felt like a lifetime, to a point where we returned back to school and everything looked a bit new. Imagine our kids, the younger ones, they've had 1 year of no schooling. We are even preempting, when I talk about sensory overload, all their five senses, auditory, visual, tactile, it's all going to be hyper-sensed. So getting back into a noisy classroom, trying to follow instructions, trying to actually sit in a classroom and actually pay attention, focus and concentrate on instructions with other 20 or 30 kids in a class. All those things are what we as educationists are foreseeing as a challenge. Fatigue. Our babies have got off from bed, slid on their uniform and sat on the screen. Now it's the early morning, back to time management. So many kids, right? I think 1 in 3 are going through vitamin D3 deficiency because of no natural sunlight and outdoor activity, no physical exercise or sport. So a lot of second aspects we're seeing are actual health concerns based on vitamin D3 deficiencies, B12 deficiencies, or poor or low energy levels because of a lack of physical exercise and movement. And I think social skill distress. Naturally, because they've not had it, suddenly again, remaking friends, group dynamics, politics with teenagers, crushes. It's going to be, we've all joked about revenge holidays. I think there's going to be a kind of a kickback with a revenge socialization. And teenagers are dying to get out. They're dying to socialize and meet. So there's going to be, I think, a whole surge of all of that coming back to normal. So that's what things, social skills, health, and education itself. Like another thing that teachers are worrying about is written expression. Our babies have forgotten how to write. So a lot of academic skills will also be perhaps at lags when we come back post this 1 year gone.
Yeah. I think the teachers and schools have done a fantastic job by, making sure that whatever they could do, like something as simple as having a uniform on, right? Having that discipline, starting classes on time, if somebody comes in late, pulling them up. So I think that was managed really, really well by schools. So my next question is, what are some of the red flags and warning signs of, mental health concerns that would require some intervention?
Sure. So see, mental health, is, to be very honest with you and not to scare anyone here, but that's going to be our next crisis. To be honest, the pandemic is one that we're dealing with. God knows when this ends. But to be very, very honest, the next mental health crisis is what we are all kind of unfortunately foreseeing. And when I talk about a crisis, of course, I can't get into all the mental health disorders and the concerns because there are too many to talk about. But since we're on the topic of children and what to look out for them, we have to first realize that, I know these are statistics that I'm going to be sharing with you all that are going to be alarming, but I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to know that, for example, India is the most depressed country in the world as of today. Most. Number one. 1 in 6 people between the ages of 10 and 19 suffer from depression. 10 and 19. As we speak, there is 1 suicide attempt every 3 seconds and 1 death by suicide every 40 seconds as we speak. You look at these rates and these age groups, they're all between 15 and 19 years of age. And the last alarming fact that WHO has brought up for us is by the time you identify, mental health concerns or warning signs, especially in children, and by the time intervention is provided, imagine the time lag. It is 8 to 10 years, 8 to 10 years. And these are worldwide statistics in collaboration with WHO and with, of course, teams over here of professionals. And when you just hear these 4 or 5 aspects, it is alarming enough to know and make us realize that as adults, as stakeholders in education, we need to be aware, we need to be prepared. And like I said, it's going to scale up post this pandemic perhaps, and already is at a crisis level, right? So when you look at warning signs, see, to start with, mental health is a spectrum. It starts with wellness being on one side of the spectrum and illness naturally being on the other side, right? With kids, what you have to look at for primarily the red flags or the warning signs, say, of an actual clinical depression, right? And to be honest, many people feel, oh, my 9-year-old can't go through depression, or 12-year-olds are too young. They don't manifest with symptoms of anxiety, but that's not true. You can have depression in a 9-year-old. You can have suicidal ideations in a 12-year-old. So when you talk of red flags, the main thing is a persistent, like say if you're talking about depression, right, which is the most common mental health concern in children and teenagers especially, is a persistent, constant feeling of sadness, feeling low, or irritability. Like a feeling that doesn't shake or go away. It's not like, oh, I'm feeling low today because mom and dad scolded me, or I'm nervous because there's an exam tomorrow. There's a consistent feeling of feeling low, okay? Then there has to be a kind of a lack and loss of interest in previous pleasurable activities. So parents will tell you, or even when we observe that, all the fun things, it could be chatting with a friend, it could be online gaming, it could be, interacting and normal chit-chatting at home. Kids seem suddenly withdrawn, there is a lack and loss of interest in almost everything. Don't feel like going down, don't feel like interacting, don't feel like playing, or clear changes in eating patterns or sleeping patterns, either the excess of it or the decline of it. Low energy levels, feeling low, feeling lethargic, constantly saying that I'm feeling tired all the time. A lack of drive and motivation. So they don't care. The academics naturally drop because of that lack of motivation and lack of drive. Another pathognomic sign is feeling overwhelmed and hypersensitive. So small things seem to, get them to reduce to tears or, an outburst, or sometimes even tantrums and meltdowns, which are unexplained. A sense of helplessness, hopelessness, worthlessness. Sometimes, older kids, I'm talking of teenagers, actually write down things in a private diary or text messaging to certain close friends that they're feeling these things, right? They can actually verbalize and express that they're feeling really low. Some can even express that they feel like dying, especially when they're going through certain negative thoughts or extremely suicidal kind of thoughts that are going on. Difficulty with attention, focus, and concentration. So, kind of lost in their own world, difficult to engage, and memory concerns for sure. So Another thing is psychosomatic symptoms. So constantly headache, backache, vague symptoms that have no real medical cause or reason. So these are the most prominent, what I call as red flags and warning signs, and of course, a lot of these depression signs and symptoms overlap sometimes with anxiety. Now, anxiety is just a constant feeling of impending doom, like palpitations in the chest, feeling cold and clammy, difficulty breathing sometimes, headaches, all of that. And all this can, what I feel are those real red flags that, all parents need to know. And I'm not saying it's abnormal to never get these. I think you've got them, I've got them. We've all gone through phases of feeling a bit depressed and low. But the main thing is when it doesn't go. So when 2 and 3 and 4 weeks of time, where there's these consistent symptoms which don't seem to shake off, you need to seek help.
So what I've seen is, people realize these symptoms, they see these symptoms, but they sometimes still hesitate to seek help. And I think because even no matter how advanced we've become, no matter how modern we've become, I feel that there's still a lot of stigma associated with, seeking emotional and psychological help. But what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Ashwin. I mean, and it's so sad. That's why I purposely brought up that statistics that even by the time you're identifying these symptoms and you get actual professional help, it's 8 to 10 years. Imagine how much you can have, achieved in that. And that's what I highlight. So, the reasons why I think, we as psychiatrists also have a bad name, so to speak, is unfortunately, I think there are a lot of myths and taboos and stigmas, right? The typical ones are, oh my God, once you go to a psychiatrist, first of all, the silly words and the connotations, right? That you're not crazy. Unless you're crazy, you need to see a psychiatrist, or you're not mad. And, these awful stigmatizing terms, right? And it's not about being crazy or mad. I mean, like a simple example that I give parents is that when you have a toothache, are you going to go to see your pediatrician or will you see a dentist? And the answer is a dentist. Now, if I have a cardiac problem, I'm not going to see my family doctor who I swear by. I will go to a specialist and a cardiologist, and the same with an eye doctor or a bone surgeon. So when there are mental health concerns, you need to naturally see a mental health professional, right? But the taboos are so high, and the problems, unfortunately, are the concept of when you see a professional, you'll be labeled, you'll be judged, you'll be given a diagnostic slot, and you'll be given medication. I think the fear is, oh my God, you're going to be put on meds. Psychiatric medications have a bad name again because they feel once you start them, you can't stop. They're addictive. They will gain, give you weight. They will, your kids will be like zombies and all these aspects. But it's not true, right? I mean, when you look at the proper scientific approach, and which we will talk about later as to when the need to give medication and the difference of psychiatric disorders and when are they psychological, and what are the two different modes of treatment then for our kids, right? But I just feel these taboos are because of a lack of knowledge. I think Googling, we all tend to go on Google and read all these awful things which are not true sometimes. I think as parents, it's a lot of guilt. Sometimes there's guilt, there's shame, or there's what will people think and say. Sometimes in joint family members, I mean, it's so sad that things are happening in their own home and joint family members don't know what's happening because it's kept all secret. A lot of feelings that it's a passing phase. They all, many parents feel, okay, it's, there is a low phase, but it'll pass. And let's change. Come on, let's go for a movie. Let's, come on, let's call a friend. Like a lot of kind of trying to heal and, cover everything up with these kind of prescribed aspects. And like I said, it doesn't go away. Problems don't go away if they're not addressed. And I truly believe that in any medical condition also, like a condition like cancer, right? The earlier you intervene, the better the prognosis. And it's so clear with mental health problems too. The earlier you intervene, the far better recovery rates, the far better prognosis. So that's what I feel are the main challenges with taboos.
So I think one thing is normalizing the fact that you can be talking to a therapist, talking to a psychologist The other day, I was talking to one of the most famous investors, very popular, very young, very aggressive guy. And in a normal conversation, he brought up, oh, my therapist was saying this. And then he paused for a reaction from me. And I didn't give him one. And he's like, you know what? Thank you. And I said, for what? He's like, thank you. You didn't call me crazy. Thank you. You didn't say anything. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. I mean, he's like, that's what he's like. We want that. Like, if I say that, right? Like in US, it's very normal. Like when I visit US, I have a company out there. And the company that I work with, major client, one of the VPs I was talking to, and she openly said, yeah, my therapist was saying this and something, something, something. It's a normal conversation and not with me alone. It was like 7, 8 people. Her teammates, her juniors were there and just talking about it like me saying I went to the dentist, right? But having that level of acceptance coming into India, I think it will take some time. But when people start talking about it openly, right, is when it's going to be treated like a normal thing. It's like going to a dentist. I don't really have to hide the fact that I went to a dentist, right? And if you have a toothache, I'll be like, hey, go to so and so, right? He's good. Go to him. Like he's the best guy for that. So that when people begin to discuss this a little more openly, I think that's when people will get over the taboo of mental health. So that brings me to my next question: like, what is the difference between actual psychiatric disorders, right, and emotional, psychological, and behavioral problems? What is the difference between the two?
So that again, that's a very, very pertinent question here for all of us to understand, when we're reaching out for help, what is that right help and when do we need it and in what direction do we need to head in terms of the treatment modalities, right? Very simple, very clear. There are psychiatric disorders and conditions that we diagnose. Now, the most common examples are clinical depression, clinical anxiety, panic attacks, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. And in very severe cases, you have schizophrenia, where you have hallucinations and delusions, right? Those are all, mental health disorders which are caused and created by neurochemical imbalances in the brain. Now, what are these? Like how simple example, right? I mean, I could do a blood test tomorrow and find out that I have high cholesterol or diabetes or, vitamin D3 deficiency, right? Now, the unfortunate part is in mental health research, I can't do that blood test to tell me which neurochemical in the brain is up or down or imbalanced, right? But that's why the clinical symptoms that I mentioned, or the red flags and the signs and the warning signs, become very important for the clinician to pick up and create a diagnosis or formulate a treatment plan, right? So now, when I talk about these like hormones, how we have hormones in our body, there are certain neurochemicals in the brain and our gut, and they're manufactured there. And the most widely researched ones are serotonin, which are responsible for our moods, or the happy hormones, as they call them in layman's terms, and dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter in the brain that's responsible for cognitions and the reward system, etc. Now, when there are mental health disorders like the ones I mentioned, there are neurochemicals that get imbalanced at the synaptic level in the brain or the gut. So these are what we call as disorders. And when you've properly diagnosed it, and then you have to sometimes naturally treat it, like how I would treat a vitamin D3 deficiency with a supplement or a cholesterol medication to bring down my cholesterol. There are very smart, intelligent, scientifically created medications which are not addictive, not going to make you like zombies, not to be taken for life. And they all, in fact, have very robust short-term treatments, right? So when I talk of short-term, nothing for life, of course, unless you're talking of a very, very severe condition where the mental health disorders become chronic, as they call it, right? But when you pick it up early, like I said, and you intervene on time, you're looking at maximum 1.5 years of robust treatment, right? So that's what a psychiatric disorder is. And everything else that falls in the other category, like, behavioral issues, emotional setbacks, peer pressure, bullying in children, marital conflict, learning setbacks, children who go through different emotional setbacks because of feeling sibling rivalry or other emotional aspects, all those come under the psychological and the behavioral and the emotional realm of diagnostics. Treatment differs. I think for every mental health condition, you're looking at, yes, if it's a disorder, you go down the pharmacotherapy route through medication and counseling and therapy. It's not just talking. Counseling also, psychotherapy is extremely scientifically researched, created, and trained. So it is a lot of insight building. And I joke with all my families that I work with, right, that thoughts can be our best friend or our worst enemy. So a lot of therapy is actually working on your thoughts to eventually build up another perception, to start creating resilience, to create acceptance for yourself, and of course goals to achieve that you can work with as a parent and or as a child, and have a process of well-being and recovery when needed. So that's how I look at the two or main differences that will help for the outcome of treatment.
Fantastic. So one question that we've gotten is, what can parents do to safeguard children's emotional and psychological well-being? Can mental health concerns be prevented?
Yeah, so that's that can be an entire webinar in itself. But the few things that I want to highlight is awareness, right? And as you rightly beautifully brought up, I think we first as parents have to go down that non-judgmental, non-biased, secure route to have normalizing conversations about mental health with our children from a very young age on, so that they know when they're feeling certain things, right? Even what are big emotions. I mean, sometimes kids are going through emotions, but they don't know how to verbalize them or express them. Or some are suppressed because, like, there's so much of conditioning sometimes in our environment, like simple things like boys don't cry, or, you can't be weak, you can't feel low or depressed because, you have to man up, you have to toughen up. There's so many subconscious conditioned environmental messages that go out there, that mental health itself sounds like something like a weakness. And I hate that, because I just feel, why should it be considered a weakness when I know some of the toughest and the strongest and the most amazing kids, teenagers and adults who are battling mental health concerns, and they're one of the most beautiful people I know. So I think conversations about mental health to normalize with our children is very, very important, so that God forsake they ever feel setbacks or feel certain symptoms, they know that they have the security and the confidence to be able to open up to us as parents, right? Another important part is, we spend so much of time, I feel, on educating them from an IQ perspective and marks driven, and how do you perform better? How do you win? How do you, it's all motivation, performance, winning, getting the best that you can. Who talks to our kids about failure? No one tells them about, the importance of losing, or feeling good when you've perhaps also come last and your friends have come first in a race. Who talks to them about dealing with peer pressure, jealousy, stress, how to deal with their first heartache when they've had a crush, maybe in grade 9 or 10.
Jaya, did we lose Dr. Zirak?
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Sorry, there was a lag.
Yeah, you're back.
So emotional intelligence, like I said, right? So that's something as schools with education, I think schools need to buck up and really, the only way I look at this is creating mental health curriculums in schools, which we've also created. We've created this beautiful module called, Minds Matter, and we've incorporated it in many schools now in Bombay. And I think that's a place to start with. And as parents, like I said, focusing on these things, how to build empathy, how to build compassion, kindness, those are very, very important starting tools to start ensuring the prevention part of mental health concerns.
So you touched upon it, which is my next question. So what should schools and education institutes be doing to ensure mental and emotional well-being of their students?
So, like I said, like schools also, there is no time. The biggest thing is we don't have time to discuss all of this. Of course, I know many schools are doing a beautiful job with values, life skills, social skill development. But again, I feel the program has to be more robust and more continuous. You see, you can't feel blindsided that this won't happen to the junior school kids or this will only happen in senior school. Like I said, it has to be Like I'm teaching grammar, math concepts right from grade 1 onwards, which will go on to grades 12, right? So in the same way, there has to be consistent educational inputs that become age appropriate. Like simple thing, like say, for example, sex education. Now, many parents ask, when does that start? And my answer to them is when your child starts understanding the English language. Because when you look at, say, sexual abuse, it doesn't happen that often to 14 and 16-year-olds. It happens to kids under the ages of 9. So 80 to 90% of kids who are sexually abused are under the ages of 9. So you have to also realize that when we start normalizing and discussing all these things, it is very, very imperative to start at an early age on. So schools need to also be very clear that they have to have a curriculum in place for mental health. They have to normalize these conversations within the classrooms. It is very pertinent to make sure that they have mental health professionals on board during the school hours, on the school premises. And like I said, have campaigns, and I keep telling schools, have an anti-bullying campaign. In senior school, talk about diversity and inclusion, talk about sexuality, talk about, how it feels to fail, like I explained, pick up maybe 4 or 5 topics to the year and have campaigns, have poster making competitions, whatever it takes, that everyone garners the same knowledge. And I feel knowledge building and education plays such a huge role, right? Because once you're aware, once you have the correct age appropriate knowledge, I think that's the stepping stone to build resilience within you, even as a child.
Fantastic. So now that online schooling is going on, what are some of the best practices and guidelines for kids who are attending school online?
So yes, so that's I think one thing that's very, very important, and I think that's happening to all of us, is this it's online burnout or screen time burnout. And it's sad because I guess as a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, I'm so done, right? I mean, how much of actual attention focus can I garner on a screen? And obviously at that age group, you don't have a parent sitting next to you to monitor you. So I know, and I run a school as well, and I know that so many teenagers are using multi-devices. They're sitting on a computer, but they're chatting on the side with their friends. They're watching YouTube videos, or they have their phones next to them and they are playing games. So there are a lot of distractions happening, or they're done with online schooling and they're taking a break, going back on Fortnite, Minecraft, video games. And it's sad because when you ask them and you try and swoop down and constrain all these things or take these privileges away, they actually break down and say, then how else do we socialize? It is true. I mean, many kids look at gaming as a way of socializing and making new friends sometimes, right? So I think we have to be clear as parents that we can't, trap them into an astringent, army regimental kind of a routine. Yes, routines, schedules, timetables, very important. But I think if we also have to understand that their mental health matters, we need to take a step back. We need to not deprive them of things that help them with social stimulation and social engagement. But the time matters. So even if they've been online on a game for about 45 minutes to 1 hour, you have to ensure they take a break. They can get back to it, but after 10, 15 minutes. So taking breaks, even when you've spoken to pediatric ophthalmologists, because a lot of queries about vision getting spoiled and their eyesight getting worse off, they talk about the same sentiments. And it's not about being for X hours online as much as taking the right breaks, having the right posture. Very, very important. A lot of our kids are lying back and doing classes, or, devices on their laps on a sofa. They talk about, helping with being erect, shoulders back, making sure that the spine and the neck alignment is, well kind of postured, so that, because otherwise, we have kids with backaches, a lot of knots in their back, headaches, eye pains. So those are all the best practices. And of course, sleeping, today there are teenagers who are unwinding and, chatting away or on screen time without their parents knowing till 2, 3 in the morning, and they have to be up at 8. And because of that, I think there's a whole sleep cycle disturbance, circadian rhythms are imbalanced, and that can lead to a whole lot of other health issues, hormonal problems, poor diets, poor hygiene. So that's another ball game altogether that we're dealing with.
I think this is going to be much tougher on teenagers with all their hormones raging, right? So how is the pandemic affecting teenagers, and what can parents do to help, or what kind of intervention can we do for them?
So teenagers is another ball game. So we've unfortunately seen a lot of addiction, screen time addiction, gaming addiction, where kids have actually become, how do I say, extremely irritable, moody, like exactly like how a drug would affect an individual teenager is how screen time addiction is. So when you take away the substance, like for example, in a drug abuse case, and you take away screen time, you actually have certain aggressive and violent behaviors. We've had kids who physically sometimes lunged out at their parents and created a lot of disharmony at home because of that. So we're seeing that on the rise. Unfortunately, because of so much of screen time, there are a lot of teenagers that are engaging in risk-taking behaviors. And that's a huge concern because, when you're browsing and chatting sometimes randomly with people all over the world, or joining WhatsApp groups, joining or viewing videos or YouTube aspects which are not age appropriate. For example, like pornography has gone up on the rise. And unfortunately, I know it's a awful thing that's happened, but when there is distress in teenagers, a lot of teenagers resort to self-harm. They take sharp objects or blades and they cut themselves on their wrists because they feel that's the way they can express the emotional pain. But that also, unfortunately, is what you kind of get as support wrongly from online, web groups and stuff like that. It's sad, but you have these online groups that actually train and teach other teenagers how to, cut yourself, how to sanitize it, how to cover it up and make sure your parents don't find out. I know it's very disturbing, but it is a huge trend that has been there since the last 2-3 years. And it's sad because teenage minds itself are so impressionable that you can go on to, being influenced strongly by these things. Substance abuse is surprisingly on the rise. One would think with the lockdown and no access, but our teenagers have learned. And the saddest part is marijuana. Marijuana or weed has become such a problem in our own city, and I'm sure all over the world to some extent. But 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, doing it at home, doing it with friends, it's so freely accessible, available, and affordable. But what teenagers and parents sometimes don't realize that it's not just organic weed. It's always sometimes, unfortunately, contaminated. And marijuana can cause very, very damaging long-term changes in the neurochemicals of the brain. It can create mental health disorders, like I talked about, from panic attacks to anxiety to depression. And now Australian research is telling us how it can induce psychosis and lead to schizophrenia. So that's how damaging it can be to the brain, even in terms of attention, focus. It is supposed to even worsen learning disabilities and exacerbate attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So that's the second concern, we are seeing with teenagers. And I think teenagers are just going through burnout. They're frustrated, they're angry, they're irritable because of the uncertainties. Like I said, at crossroads, board exams happening or not, young adults who finish college and new job opportunities haven't opened up. So, that whole age group is literally going through a lot of, I would say, frustration and angst because of literally, anxiety based on uncertainties, So I think as parents, we need to acknowledge that these are real feelings that they're going through. Imagine teenagers are meant to be outdoors, meeting friends, engaging with sports, exercising in gyms, swimming in a pool. All this has been deprived for them, right? So we need to step in as parents and ensure that, of course, there's a long list of things we can do for them. But again, normalizing the environment at home, shielding them from so much of negativity that's going around, helping with online engagement, what we're calling as social school friends or family members who are as secure and protective, or have COVID protective behaviors as you, making sure you engage with those communities and families so that there is some social connect, either online or offline. I think engaging as parents, we are sometimes so involved with our own stress and work that, I'm sometimes talking to my kids, but I'm typing an email on my phone, and that's unfair. I think we need to realize that even with teenagers or our younger kids, we need to ourselves have discipline with our work-life balance. When we walk out of our work rooms, we need to disengage and disconnect from work and be fully present. And I think being mindfully present, and I'm not talking of quantitative time, quality time, even if it's just 1 hour or 2 hours that you have with your kids, no matter what the age, look at them, feel them, hear them, understand what they're saying, monitor their body language. Are they low today? Are they happy today? Are they looking anxious? Is there something that they want to tell you, right? So I just feel mindful, intuitive parenting with engagement and being aware of your kids is very, very important.
I think one thing that you said, struck up a chord with me is hearing what they're saying, because they'll be saying something, but there's a subtone, there's a subtext, their body language is different. And especially for younger kids, they want to spend time with you. And if you're unavailable, for older kids, they probably don't want to spend time with you, but, making sure that whatever, you need to force that time with them, right? Going in that teenager's room and just spending like half an hour with them, not 2-3 hours. You may not have 2-3 hours, they may not have 2-3 hours, but even that half an hour conversation, I think will go a long way, right? For that bonding between the teenager and parents.
Sometimes I'm telling parents, it doesn't have to be conversational. Like you rightly said, your kid may be on a device or whatever. Like say, get them off a device, choose a movie that all family members can watch. Watch a movie together on a bigger screen. It's even better for all the other aspects that I spoke about. Plan something new and different and fun and innovative. Today, teenagers love other stuff, like even a game like Scrabble. Board games can be fun, card games, but we need to actually make sure that there is, there are these innovations happening on a regular basis. That is very, very important for me.
Fantastic. So while we've been talking about kids and teenagers, how can parents safeguard their own, psychological and emotional needs and become more resilient in the pandemic?
Yeah. So I think what I just started off saying, right, as parents, we need to first, like I said, build ourselves and equip ourselves with knowledge so that we create and generate more awareness, so that we can create what I call as a very important term is prevention, right? Prevention of mental health concerns, physical health concerns, all of that. But if you are not okay yourself, you can't expect to be okay as a parent or with your parenting skills. So you need to first look after yourself. You need to first create balances for yourself as well, so that you can be an effective individual in the house environment and as a parent and later, right? Secondly, try and celebrate everything, small achievements at home, gratitude, right? I think we all, if nothing else, have realized this crazy 1 year that we take so many silly, stupid, small things for granted. So start actually focusing on that mindfulness, more thought, more intuition, and more mindfulness into all small aspects that we have within ourselves. It could be having food on our table. It could be a roof over our head. It could be still having our jobs. It can be still the love in our family. Yes, we are home, but we have great quality time with our kids, right? We're doing things that we could never have done before, like doing this with, wearing boxer shorts, having the fun element, adding humor, acting silly sometimes at home, or, just, playing loud music and dancing with our kids, right? So celebrating these small things, making small, and if it's a family of 3 and 4 people, everyone has birthdays, right? So making a big thing at home with birthday celebrations, Christmas break, Diwali, festivals. So those, I think, highlights communication. Make sure communication is easy, transparent, honest, age appropriate, right? Be vigilant. The minute you know you're not okay, please reach out for help. I'm not saying you need to seek help professionally immediately, but you can just talk out how you're feeling to even a friend, a family member, your spouse, or even then a professional if you feel you need to, right? the balance is very important. The work-life balance, you have to focus on the smallest and the most basics, like, are you sleeping right? Are you eating right? Is your diet balanced? Are you binge eating, or are you eating a midnight snack, right?
Right.
Very important is movement. No matter what, why I brought up dancing and shaking about, and I know we're all confined, but I can't explain how important physical and mental movement is. So trying to find ways to exercise, because physical health, mental health, gut health, that's why I brought up movement, the diet, and the mental healthy aspects, is because they all go hand in hand in ensuring your own, emotional and psychological well-being. And I think creativity, very important to find different ways to channelize and do things that you've never done before, pursue an old hobby perhaps, or start doing things that you thought you had no time for, uh, like, and make sure that you give yourselves breaks from devices, because otherwise we're going to have a whole generation out there addicted to our phones and our gadgets and iPads. And yeah, and I think a little bit on touching on the importance of our diets, ensure probiotics, because when you look at the superfoods for mental health, probiotics, simple things like dahi, or even capsules and supplements that generate probiotics. Vitamin D3, very important, through sunlight or vitamin D3 supplements for you and your child. Make sure you have enough of vitamin C through different varieties of foods and vegetables and fruits, or even vitamin C supplements. And I think very important component is omega-3 fatty acid that you get as a fish oil supplement or eating salmon fish. And if you're vegetarian, then flax seeds and white oats. Those are very high, and walnuts in omega-3 fatty acid. And for stress and anxiety, they say magnesium as a supplement, and for sleep. So, if you can get to have these supplements even taken as capsules and supplements, they're supposed to be, a good aspect for, your mental health, and a good clean diet. And lastly, like I said, I really propagate the importance of focusing on emotional intelligence, for yourself, for your kids. And, that's those are the main things, and lastly, I think what's helped me is the concept, what I call as the silver lining concept. It's so easy to look at the negatives in one another, the craziness that's going around us, faults in our spouses, faults in our kids, and that's not going to help. But so when I use the word silver lining, looking at the positives in amidst the negatives, looking at the good things in the bad, looking at all the amazing aspects of life around us, despite all the negative setbacks that we have. And I think that leads to more hopefulness, more looking forward to things in life. And if nothing else, building up on inner strength. And I think for me, the most ultimate goal for us as individuals and for our kids is to keep on building on that inner strength and resilience. And resilience doesn't mean just inner strength, but the strength to even bounce back and come back stronger. Because this year's taught us a lot as well. So taking those learnings forward, whether it's even digital practices like you and me were discussing in our workspaces, to a whole lot of other things that we've learned through this year.
I think recognizing the silver lining, like just, when people say I'm stuck at home. So one of my teammates, when I was asking them, hey, what are you looking forward to in the next week or so? He's like, oh, right, I'm feeling stuck at home, or I'm stuck at home. I'm like, if you just change that wording from I'm stuck at home, hey, I'm getting to work from home, just putting it in a separate, in a different way, makes you look at the same situation from a different angle. I keep saying, oh, I get to work from home. That's fantastic, right? I'm saving time. I'm spending more time with my kids. I have more times for hobbies. And so one thing personally, which I want to share with you, I've been wanting to learn to paint forever, like maybe last 20 years. As a serial entrepreneur, I've never gotten the time. A month ago, I actually learned how to do digital art, and I've actually become pretty good at it. And now it's also a bonding activity with the family, right? My kids want to draw something. I've taught them how to do it. We do together. My wife will write something, I will draw something for it. So it's become like using that hobby, a newly learned hobby, to kind of bind the family, which was a fantastic thing I would never even thought of. And I look at that as one of the silver linings, spending time with family is a blessing, right? I mean, many of us, when we lead lives outside, we barely get any time. It's you come home at 8:30, you're dead tired from the travel, right? So using that extra time with the families, and I think I'm going to, if I ever go back to work, I'm going to miss that. Like how I don't think I can go back to work now, right? I mean, that extra time, you're not going to get that. So we've got a lot of questions. I'm going to try and keep them to a minimal because we've gotten a lot of them. So one of them is, and I found this interesting myself, is IQ inherited or developed? That was a very interesting question for me. I don't know if
it's a bit of both because IQ or intelligence is so multifaceted, right? I mean, you can have an intelligence for a skill. So you may even have, okay, let's put it this way. I may have a child with a learning disability. So dyslexia, which is a problem with reading and comprehending what he's reading, but his IQ may be 140, which puts him at a genius level of IQ. So intelligence is, that's why I use the word multifaceted. You can't just put a kid and say, oh, you're intelligent because you're getting 90% in school. No, it's got a lot of other facets, which are, yes, a lot of it is, I would say 70 to 80% is inherent. So you're born with certain, like say music. Like I know truly that some people have it, some don't. Like I took to my piano lessons, like I went through grade 10 and my brother was stuck at a grade 1 and he still can't play, whereas I can still play. The same with certain, skills. So a lot of things are inbuilt, but a lot of things can be created with a lot of hard work and persistence and, regularity. So it's a bit of both. There's no one or the other correct answer with that.
Perfect. So somebody's asked a question, how do you deal with kids in the age bracket of 8 to 10 who speak about suicide in a way of solving their life's problems, like when parents regulate screen time, game time, when I think main thing is screen time, right? So, and if they talk about that, how do you deal with that?
So, I've realized that this age group, the kids who are the aware ones, and when we've had open conversations about what suicide is, we usually tell kids that we don't talk about it as a weakness. We talk about it as where we use the word mental health concerns, like how you can not be well when you have fever and a cough and cold. Some people are not well emotionally. So that's the main kind of language we use for kids. And sometimes when you're really unwell and you go through something like depression where you feel you can't cope, you decide to end your life. I mean, that's just the premise of how we sometimes talk about suicide at that. So that's not a healthy coping mechanism. But when you're feeling sad or you're feeling angry or you're feeling upset or trapped or frustrated, there are so many healthy ways to cope. And that's when you give what the other healthy coping mechanisms are. Let's take a break, the music, the dance, and all that we've discussed so far, right? And what I want to bring up here and highlight here is kids at this age usually sometimes bring this up as a way of manipulation. So we have to be also clear that when a kid is saying, oh, I want to die or I'll kill myself if you take away my iPhone or my gadget, it's just an expression of frustration and sometimes attention seeking. And we shouldn't fall into that trap. We need to be careful and understand, because like I said, when a kid is really expressing that, they have to have all the other signs and symptoms and the warning red flags of clinical depression to feel suicidal in that sense.
So the next question is, how do you pick a mental health professional? I would really appreciate some guidance on this aspect, therapist or psychiatrist. It's a taboo effect, so people don't share references, which is true.
So I can you with that personally. See, I believe in a multidisciplinary approach, right? So like I explained, that sometimes with a child or with an individual, you may need counseling with a psychotherapist and a psychologist and maybe a psychiatrist if it's something clinical, or to rule out something clinical, right? At Empower, the center, we have everything under one roof. And it's a unique place that I believe that a center like this does not exist in our country. And it's to have all verticals under one roof. So when you have a multidisciplinary approach, so there'll be someone who's a specialist in a child who's 6 years and under, for say play therapy. We have someone specializing in marital counseling, someone who specializes in death and bereavement counseling, someone who's good at trauma, someone who's great with only teenagers. So we have multiple people who we've hired with skill strengths. So I guess a bit of overseas experience and training, other specialties like this, and like I said, teamwork, right? So we follow similarly to the NHS system of mental health in the UK, where we have also multidisciplinary team meetings, So the cases are supervised professionally by us as professionals and senior managers. And that's how we take this forward in the most ultra professional way. So Empower would be a great place to look at, with the multiple levels of professionals that we have are all under one roof.
Fantastic. So I think we're at the end of our time. So I'm going to end with last one question. So how do you calm your child when he starts off with a psychosomatic pain in his stomach, and when it progresses to a minor anxiety attack, and he's feeling like he has to vomit, faster breathing than usual, hands get clammy. So how should a parent deal with a child at that moment?
So again, it depends on the age group. So I don't know which age group that this parent is talking about, but usually this doesn't happen in very young kids. So I'm assuming you're somewhere between 8, 9 up to adolescent, being there for the kid. So sometimes even just holding your child when he's going through an anxiety attack like this, distraction works. So sometimes I know many parents who play their favorite genre of music for the child, either through earphones or externally. Sometimes even just changing the environment, so going into another room, sometimes darkening the room, or choosing an activity that could be calming and engaging. So sometimes I know kids who like to just doodle. So when there is an anxiety attack coming up like this, and preempting it, doodling, coloring, breathing, trying to tell, facing your child and asking him to just breathe with you, breathing in the right way through your nostrils, taking an inhalation where your abdominal muscles come out, where your diaphragm goes down, and exhaling. So just kind of counting breaths and breathing. What has worked as a strategy for me with teenagers is telling them to hold ice. That sometimes, I don't know why, but it works. It's like a way of distraction, but, holding on to ice cubes, drinking a cold glass of water or sipping on it. Homeopathy has lovely rescue remedy drops, which is very safe, and that's used a lot for children. You put about 8 to 10 drops in a glass of water and sip it. It kind of helps that calm down as well. And I think those are the main 5, 6 things that can help the immediate, aspect of an anxiety attack, And of course, if it's periodic where it actually declines functionality, right, you get very smart, safe, anxiolytic medications for children. Like, sometimes kids who have flight phobias or exam phobias and, anxiety attacks before an exam, you get smart medication for that too, which is only to be given as an SOS during an anxiety attack.
So, and this is obviously prescribed by a doctor. This should not be self-medicated at all, right?
The homeopathy medication, which is usually called rescue remedy, or any homeopath will give you specifically medications for that. And this one I'm talking about is it comes under the genre of clonazepam, and that has to be prescribed by a psychiatrist.
Okay. So I think that brings us to the end of session. I know there are a few questions. There are actually a lot of questions, but I think we're short on time. So, Doctor, I would like to, thank you for taking out the time and, spending this with us. I have displayed a couple of numbers and contact information on screen. So in case you would like to, talk to Zirak or any of his teammates, the number over there is for his Empower Clinic. You can definitely connect with him on LinkedIn if you want to stay in touch with him. For anything on LinkedIn, my information is there as well. And Zirak, thanks a lot for taking out the time. I really appreciate it. And I know you're extremely busy. I know you have a very packed schedule, but thank you for taking out the time and spending this with us and all the participants. And with that, I would like to end the session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.